We're also looking for someone to take a ring to Mount Doom. Anyone? Harold has volunteered.
Remember, if you volunteer, if you're bring the Mount Doom, you're not taking notes. Ben, can you explain the video from the room before we're going?
It's not self-evident.
No.
This is a clip from a K-pop video that shows a young Korean man waiting. Although not many of us are young Korean men, we were waiting for the meeting to start.
Thank you.
I've just received, however, Mary has sent an updated video or GIF rather for me to change it to. So if you give me just a moment.
Could you make it otter? Because that is the end.
She had a different direction for us to go. Well, let's see if I go over here and refresh it. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
You always ask from actual Korea.
Did I just hear you say the internet is always right?
Do you know what irony is?
Oh,
We designed it all to always be right.
according to Wikipedia, it's a small town in Poland, but that's just because I changed it to that. All right, welcome back to IETF 97. Here we are in RTC Web again. We're planning on restful, no real controversy today. However, could you hit the slide thing? We have to remind. Oh, wait, the next one, please. Apparently, you're going to have to read this in Korean. It's still the note well. It just happens to be the note well in Korean. Actually, we might be paying more attention to it because now really the RFC 5378 really pops, doesn't it? Right. I remind you that whether you're here in Seoul, in Chicago, in Prague, in wherever we're going after that, seem to recall, this applies. If you're going to get up and talk, you have to be aware of your duty to disclose any IPR relevant to your contributions. So, really, you couldn't keep going, man?
Oh, I don't know. I'm taking direction.
We're going to have to talk to this one.
We're going to have to talk to this slide. So the agenda, which we'll eventually see up here, has been modified to add a new day, Friday. Well, this Friday is new to us. It's sort of like a car that's been gently used. Actually, I believe, oh, good, even better. What are you doing?
I don't know. How do you have this thing set up? This is so bizarre.
Anybody who thinks it was unwise for letting Sean touch my laptop, please raise your hand right now, because I'm beginning to have some regrets.
I just clicked the button. What's going on?
All right, so the first step is to review those items of pain which we went into On our first meeting,
Go back, oh, no. There you go. Okay.
related to JSEP, then we'll do IP handling, FEC, and then draft Copeland RTCWEB P2P IDP because its author is leaving. The current theory is that on Friday we will handle any overflow items from today's meeting. There'll be a new puppy picture, I swear. It might be otters, the river puppy. We'll go into the overview draft and security architecture drafts. Now, of course, if we finish today, you get Friday back. So you have that inducement. I believe the first order of business is, Cullen, if you would come up and repeat your spiel from the M-Music session to make sure that this is copacetic with RTC Web as well. And then we'll turn it over to Ecker and Harold for reviewing with us the action item data.
Okay, so the sort of newest text in JSEP is this section 6 that tells you about where this RTP packet goes and how you get it to the right transceiver based on various bits you may find in it. And a proposal how to resolve this after a great conversation with Colin and Magnus and Jonathan this morning is we're going to split most of that text, or what I want to do is propose making 2 pull requests. And Peter's probably typing on one of them right now because he's way ahead of me. I did a GitHub clone of the other one. That's about where I am. We're going to make a PR to take a bunch of that text and move it to the bundle draft. So there'd be 2 PRs, one for JSEP, one for bundle. The algorithm would stay largely the same, slight variation I'll get to in a second, but largely the same algorithm from an implementer's point of view. We would refactor a little bit the way we describe the art. Right now the text refers to the SSRC you find in the packet. And that really maps up with the RTP stream. When you get an RTP packet, it's in an RTP stream, and that RTP stream is identified by the SSRC. We'll sort of rephrase the terminology a little bit, make it easier to align with RTP terminology by using RTP stream. We will explain in the bundle draft how you get from that to an M section. We won't talk about specific terminology that would be used in the JSEP draft. Then in the JSEP draft, we'll refer back to the bundle draft, as we already do, and we will also say that, once you get it to the right M section, that corresponds to a transceiver, and now you know what to do with it. So that's mostly just here's how we're going to move the text around, clarify it a little bit, not change the algorithm. The algorithm change that we're proposing making is right now, if you have, you can use the payload type as a hint. If you don't have any other information to know which M line they should go to, you don't have SSRC signaling, or you don't have any MIDs in the packets or something, you could use the payload type to figure out which M line to send it to if all the payload types are unique across every M line. And what the draft says right now is that if it's not unique across all the M lines, you go to the first one. And the change that we're proposing making is to say that if it's not unique, you discard the packet if you don't know which one it is. Because Magnus pointed out that this was just like a non-sensible location. If you're trying to demux these things based on payload types and your payload types aren't unique across the M lines, like something's gone really badly wrong. And when something's gone really badly wrong, just letting it sort of work in some weird way is probably not the right answer. Probably getting an error like having it not work would be better. So that's the only proposed change. I think it's pretty minor, and I've gone through that with, I think, a lot of the people who would probably be worked up about it. They mostly seem okay. I think it's a pretty minor change that is not going to cause anything. So 2 questions, is people all right with that basic technical change that we're proposing and to the algorithm? And then the other question is, any objections to this basic idea of doing these 2 PRs? I'll want to get these reviewed pretty quickly afterwards. I mean, I know people can't agree to them until they see them, but that's the basic plan. Any objections? Excellent. Okay. Peter and I will keep working on that then. Thank you.
And just to confirm, you'll send them to the list, not just PRs and GitHub.
Oh, we will. Yes, most definitely. The links to the PRs and GitHubs will be sent to the list. I'll do a little better than that.
Okay, this is far too long. It's we had a really buggy problem, and
John, relaying from Bernardo Boba, he says, does this mean PT overlap is illegal in bundle? And this is on the previous topic, sorry, I missed the comment. And the answer is no, it means that you actually have to use mid like you're supposed to and not try to use PT over PT. If you're doing PT overlap, you have to use mid, but you have to use mid anyway, so that's not a huge hardship.
okay, back to invalidating offers. We had a small job to make, and we made it bigger. This is RTC Web. Okay, next slide. Problem. When is an offer valid? You see the code. It's not clear that why anyone would ever do that. And it's not defined to be sure to work. And it's a problem because things may have changed so that the first offer was a stupid thing to do. Next. Next slide. Options considered. Next. Solution A, invalidate all the old offers. Every time you call create offer, you can't do any of the old stuff. No changes to existing code. That should be nice. It's almost everything we say here apply to create answer to. Next. Or we could say that when you commit to an offer, when you do set local description, then, well, magic should happen.
We have Justin and others on the remote participation.
The projector, we can't see it all.
Oh,
So someone zoomed out the projector, I think. Okay, that's good. Keep it. And the objection we had to solution B was that if the first slide describes a problem, this still has the problem. So discard that. Next. Solution C. Wow. Remove set local description. It's a stupid call anyway. Instead, we should make a call saying call or offer. Well, the problem with that is that it requires rewriting every application in existence, which is kind of not popular anymore. Next. And of course, then we come up with solution D, which is kind of like solution C, but is backwards compatible. Yeah, backwards compatibility. Love that. So set local description does something interesting. It will do what create offer. It will set the local description to what create offer created last. End of story. And of course, that means that calling create offer could actually be made optional. Why should you do it? There turned out to be one little wrinkle. PR answer. With PR answer, create answer cannot know whether what you intended was a PR answer or an answer. That's the only reason why set local description needs an argument at all. So scratch that. So we thought, yeah, we can make it do it. I mean, this is for orientation because this is strictly a WebRTC matter. It's just a matter of the shape of the IP of the API, not it's not about anything that goes into JSEP at all. We kind of settle this. The thing we're suggesting is that create local description invalidates all previous offers. And the way we're suggesting it should be done in the API is we actually pass it behind the scenes. Set local description has no power to change it. And that means set local description can be made simpler. Next slide. So instead of having set local description take an argument that says, here's the SDP, first what kind of operation it is, and then all the SDP. We just say what kind of operation it is. So apply that across browsers. For backwards compatibility's sake, next slide, we say, if you have an offer, okay, we'll eat that too and take the argument out of it. And if you send us a wrong SDP, we'll complain. And next time around, we'll make it illegal because that's what you do after having complained for a while. And then we just have set local description with an offer, answer, or PR answer. No more.
Let's get all the way through it.
Yep.
We're going to get all the way through it and then take discussion.
Yep. Okay. Next slide. Next slide. So the nice thing is that no app gets broken for anything that is guaranteed to work today. There are cases where things might have worked today. We're not sure why they should ever work, but they might have worked today where they will now be broken, but they were not guaranteed to work anyway. And the nice thing is the app gets simpler, the spec gets simpler. We'll cook up a pull request between us to the WebRTC spec and get that in there. If we're not cut down by missiles of fire from the room and from Justin. Okay, next. It's a bit implicit, yes, but since we want to be backwards compatible, names are going to be strange. Yeah, lose a few. Next. Yeah, that's more detail. We could be even more creative. I mean, omit the argument and say that it's implied, except for the PR answer case. Yeah. Next. Yeah. So that's what we recommend. Now, Justin, I think.
You just left.
Yeah. So perhaps he likes it now. It's back. It's back.
Let's try it.
Hey, everyone. So one other case, and I guess that probably still works, is the rollback case.
Yep. Rollback rolls back to what it always rolled back to, previous stable state.
Sure, but you need to be able to pass in and roll back to the set local or set remote.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. We forgot to add a mention of that magic string, and it's an argument for the magic string argument. Sounds good.
Christer, is this somehow related to the discussion on the mailing list of removing PR answer altogether? And if that would happen, would that somehow impact your recommendation here, or wouldn't this even be an issue? Or
It would not, since Justin mentioned the rollback case, it would not impact it would not impact the details here. I hoped for a little more simplification until we remembered PR answer, but since we also had rollback, we have no more simplifications to make. It doesn't matter.
So Colin, I was going to mention the rollback too, but it's well covered. So I like this solution. It sounds like a good path to me. But the answer doesn't just set the local STP. It starts sending stuff with the new local STP. So does the timing of things change? I mean, the timing, like, when is the timing of when you start using that new thing in proposal D? Is it when you called create offer, or is it when you call the set answer?
When you call set local description. Just
okay, so it just caches the value and then it applies it at the same time as it currently, as if you'd passed it in.
Yes. So instead of caching the information that this is the only value you should accept, it caches the information itself and justifies it.
This sounds good. I like it.
Simple.
Dan Burnett, this sounds good. Just a quick question. If you call create offer and then you call set local description with answer as the string, what happens?
the same thing as you, that depends on the states.
I'm just curious.
Let me mumble. Because create offer in have remote description state should not do anything sensible. I forget whether the spec actually says that it returns an error or what. But create offer shouldn't be possible to do in have remote description state.
Right, so
It's a stupid thing.
the reason I was asking is because the way sort of simple current code works is that whether you call create offer or create answer, you can just pass whatever you get back into set local description. You don't actually, your code may not need to know whether it's an offer or an answer. Now your code needs to know whether it's an offer or an answer and get it right. So,
Yeah.
In the future, when you deprecate this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now it'll be fine.
Yeah.
Right, and we're concerned about, we think it's more complicated for applications in the future when we use the current hand.
Sure. This seems like it's very so fractionally less complicated for applications. By the way, I mean, you realize that you could also just replace the thing that is emitted with the string offer or answer.
Yep. Or you could even do SDP dot
Yeah.
operation or whatever the field name is.
Just go back to the original problem one. Sorry.
Oh, hey, yeah, so I kind of agree with Lorenzo that the string as an argument seems kind of ambiguous. Don't we want to make sure that if the application thinks it's passing in like X, that like if it's not going to get X, that like something breaks?
Yes, we should.
So like how?
That's part of the plan.
So basically, whatever the last thing, the last argument to create offer, what if either create offer, create answer, whatever the last thing that was called, we're going to assume that's what's being passed into set and local description.
Yes.
Peter Thatcher. Well, I think it would work that if you passed an offer, it would apply the last offer you created. If you passed an answer, it would apply the last answer you created. You wouldn't call create offer and then pass an answer and expect or set local description answer and expect the offer to be applied.
Yeah. That would take a cache of two things.
Right, which is not a big deal.
But if you do pass in an object that says offer and then there's SDP, we're going to check then that the SDP matches the cached SDP, and if it doesn't match, then we explode.
I think that's wise. Yes. Explode as in promise rejected.
And if anybody tries to pass in the value from the current local description as set local description, I guess we would explode. Not clear why.
I think we should.
Yeah, I mean, my only concern is really like I'm not a big fan of the string. I think I'd rather see the object with the type filled in and just not the SDP parameter, and accept that as an alternative to passing in the type and the SDP. That seems a little bit less, a little bit more consistent with what we're doing already right now. Just saying, if you omit the actual SDP parameter, we just use the one that we think you would have wanted to use.
Yeah, the nice thing about doing strings is actually that you only need that you could say that, okay, if there isn't anything cached, we just call create offer for you. But that's
I think that's a bridge.
we'll
too
take
far.
that to the WebRTC.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that like the set local is no longer quite the mirror of set remote, I think is kind of heading down a complicated path. Like, I think we should fix the problem we're sort of charged to fix here, and not decide that we're going to like go remodel like the kitchen while we're at it.
Whether we think it's a string or an object that has a string or an enum or whatever, like it's basically the same thing though, and we can discuss that in the W3C, right?
Sure.
For this working group, It's really a question of whether doing that in the W3C solves this problem that we came to address here.
So option D with all the
So it's just been,
caveats
I'm
is
really
also-
completely lost on what the problem is that we think this solves, because it seems to me that the case you're talking about here already, if we didn't change anything in the draft, when you went to apply that, it would say like the generation of this SDP doesn't match the generation of the create offer. Like this is wrong. I mean, you modified the SDP in a way that's not allowed. So I'm not seeing what change you're actually proposing. I believe the draft currently creates an error if you did the situation you're currently talking about.
if that had been clear in the draft, then we would have closed the bug already, wouldn't we?
If the people who were closing the bugs understood what we were talking about, which would not be me, I don't understand the problem yet, then maybe the bug would be closed, yes. But I'm not understanding the problem. And I believe that if you generate a generation of SDP, and then you generate another generation of SDP, when you set local, the current text that says you're not allowed to change the SDP will go, whoa, dude, that SDP is changed, because it'll have a different things in it, and it won't work. And it's the version number that will have rotated.
You
Tell me I'm wrong. I'm
you
not
may
sure
believe
why.
the spec says that, but I would ask you to point me to the exact text that says you can't do that. It doesn't say you can't. It doesn't say the most recent one. It just says you can't change it.
So that was the discussion on Monday. I thought the same thing you are thinking, but
I mean, it may be
the
natural.
conclusion seemed
It may
to be
natural,
that
and
we
in
have
fact,
to clarify.
So that's resolution A, right? Is like
Yeah.
resolution A is simply say, well, the semantics always meant that, and those are the semantics.
We see resolution A.
Yep. Solution A is the same as solution D, but without mucking around with the interface. Yes,
The problem, you see, the problem with all of your solutions is they ignore rollback, so it makes it sort of a little bit harder to analyze these. But I think this is right on create offer, but wrong on create answer. I don't know. Again, I guess I favor the simplest version of fixing this would be something that generated an error when you passed in SDP that was not a rollback and not the most recent thing. Yeah.
Yep.
That had been changed since the most recent. What I would propose is in the text where we have where you said you can't change it, we add the word can't change it from the most recent thing. The most recent create offer, create answer. It'd be like that.
I think that's the minimum patch to JSON.
That sounds excellent.
The
Okay.
rest we can discuss in WebRTC. Finished?
Adam Roach, I wanted to come and speak up and I know that this is a bike shed, but I wanted to speak in favor of that because I think what we found here is there's a circumstance that everyone thought it said something, someone discovered it said something else, and we should just make it say the thing we all thought it said in the first place. Because anything else is just like making late changes to no good purpose.
Well, just to remind ourselves of, we had almost the exact same discussion on Monday, and there was concerns over breaking existing apps, so we decided to have a study group or whatever we called it. And the study group came back and said, yes, we can do A, but if we do this tweak to the API, we can roll out a change that would prevent breaking anybody. Right,
how
but
does this avoid?
that's kind of the result.
How does this avoid breaking somebody who like called create offer more than once, and like where that currently works, that will now stop working?
Well, if you look at the slides that had the steps, if we basically tell app developers to use a slightly different API where they pass in the type instead of the whole session description, then after that point, we can start rejecting things, and it will give them time to switch over to a state where they wouldn't blow up.
Right, but if we tell them to, if we need to tell them to change their behavior, then we can do whatever we want. This is for people whose code is already written and will not change behavior. Yeah, Adam Roach again. Not to put too fine a point on it, but the code that was doing that doesn't work in Firefox anyway. Okay, that's good. Right.
Jonathan Max, I mean, it seems like if we do solution A, writing a trivial JavaScript library to implement D on top of A is, about half an hour's work. So I don't see why we need to worry about baking it into the browsers that way necessarily.
So just to be clear, if we don't care about breaking anybody, then we wouldn't have needed the study group at all. And we would have gone with A, which is kind of what we decided on Monday, but we did the study group for not breaking anybody. But if it's true that they're already broken, then all right, we'll just do A.
So. All right, Justin, you're up next.
Okay, I sent my slides for the FEC stuff, and I've just sent my slides for the IP. All right, there we go, great. Do they fit on the screen? Great, even better. Okay, so this should be quick. So thanks to a bunch of folks who reviewed this in detail. Well, not that fast. Okay, all right. Thanks to a bunch of folks who reviewed this in detail. I incorporated a number of different points from a number of different people. This basically came down to a bunch of just cleanup on specific sections. On the discussion of where and when FEC should be used, there's a specific discussion around RTX and how at some points, if the overall RTT is low, RTX may in fact be preferable to using FEC. Also, when using a layered codec such as VP8, it's advisable to only protect the base layer as opposed to having to protect the entire video stream. I also clarified the implementation requirements of what exactly browser or implementations need to support. This included a must for RFC2198, and we changed the FlexFEC stuff from a must to a should because Bernard pointed out that we really don't have any implementation experience with FlexFEC yet, and as such, a must might be too much. Also, there was a lot of discussion from Magnus and Stefan Proust on how the max read parameter for AMR should be handled. And Magnus was kind enough to send me a link to the document for 3GBP where it describes how that should be set. And that is now codified into the document that max read must be filled in when you're using AMR. Just indicate how much FEC the decoder can handle. But that's pretty much the totality of the changes. As such, I think this document is ready for a last call.
So we'd really like to thank everybody who's already done a review of this. Is there anybody who's read the most recent version who doesn't believe we're ready for a working group last call? Okay. The chairs will take an action item then to do a working group last call on this draft. And so everybody who has not already reviewed this current version, expect to take it up. Thank you very much. Okay, we now have the IP address handling text up.
Okay, so when we last talked about this in IETF 95, there was a specific block of text you'll see here as old, which a series of people stood up at the mic and proceeded to throw under the bus. Basically, in response to that, I've tried to respond to, I think, the concern, which was that there's a bit of an assumption made here about the bold text that did not go over well. And the new text, while being a bit longer, tries to sort of not make any specific requirement on exactly how implementations need to behave, and just give one example of here's how someone might want to handle the complex problem about getting actually consent for network enumeration. So I won't read this out aloud. I'll let you also read it But I believe that this strikes a better balance of just sort of explaining what the problem is and how one might want to address it. But that is the only slide here. That was the most contentious topic. From the last time we talked about it, I hope this new text will sort of satisfy the concerns that were brought to the mic. If this seems okay, it would be great to get some feedback on that. If so, this document is pretty close to being ready for last call. There's still some mechanical stuff I need to do to include the appropriate RFC 2119 language, but this was like the biggest open issue.
So can I ask the folks who had previously had concerns about this if they're satisfied? And I think that's Wendy and DKG. You were both people who'd had concerns. Take a moment to read it and let us know what you think.
Just Colin here. I mean, I'll say I will repeat what I've said with no ask for the working group to change anything. But I mean, I always had viewed the getting access to use a camera implied granting access to my network as sort of like hysterically bad. But I don't have a better suggestion, and I can live with this. I'm not, I don't agree with it, but I think I've said my piece before and it's been heard and I'm done.
Like stalking the microphone. This is DKG. Similar to Colin, network location is an entirely different thing from access to the camera. Conflating the two seems very weird to me. I agree most strongly in this text here about the underlying issue is complex and difficult to explain, making explicit consent for enumeration troublesome. So I don't have any fixes. The guidance I would like to see is if people could think through and experiment with some kind of attempt to use public network addresses and then gradually fall back to things that might be more sensitive. But I realize that's going to be worse performance initially, which is of course not what people want to see. So I don't know how to recommend a fix for this, unfortunately. But I'm still not happy.
Yeah, Wendy Seltzer, and I think similarly, I appreciate the steps the text has taken from where it previously sort of implied that network location was just a function of the camera and other media access, and I too would like to see user agents offering some different controls and giving us users a chance to try more protective measures, but don't have good suggestions.
It's already a clarifying question. Right now in the new text, it says gathering all possible candidates should only be performed when some form of user consent has been provided. What are the conditions in which you think that makes that should a should and not a must?
I'm afraid he's frozen.
So let me sort of review my notes on this. Let's see. Okay, yeah, this was my point earlier about I need to update the 2119 language in here, and this couldn't, in fact, be a must. I think that would actually probably be appropriate in this case. I wouldn't get too hung up on like that particular word.
Okay, so in that case, you would not do the possible candidate gathering until some form of user consent has been provided. The problem is exactly what form of user consent to provide when we don't have like a great model in our minds for, hi, would you like to understand in deep detail just how user sensitive the various locations that you might be revealing given different IP addresses is to a user? I guess that let's go back to the line since I'm wandering off of clarification.
there are squirrel. So it seems like there actually are two questions here. What should be the behavior which we dictate the browser do? And the second is, what should be the explanatory text that surrounds it that explains why we made that decision?
Right.
And frankly, I thought we had agreement that the behavior, and both these texts describe exactly the same, made exactly the same behavior. And so, frankly, I thought we had agreement that this was the behavior, and we were only debating how we ought to rationalize it. And I'm fine to spend more time on that, but I'm extremely disappointed to see us relitigating yet again what the behavior ought to be. I believe we had consensus on this. I'd like the chairs to rule the discussion of what the behavior ought to be out of scope.
To back Ecker too, I thought I had lost this. I'm not trying to relitigate it. I thought I was in the rough, and I am okay being in the rough.
Ted Hardy, with my chair hat on, I don't think that this discussion is necessarily relitigating it, but it is important that the language actually be clear to any application or vendor on what this actually means. And so all of this work that says, hey, you've got to get some form of consent, actually is a change from, it is specifically the get user media consent you must get, right? Because it is now opening up the possibility that you might have a different form of consent that you are using instead. For example, data channel consent, right? So I think we have to look at this as kind of a whole package. We can't go back and say, okay, we've got the idea. Does this reflect the idea? Because it's really, the details are here, what are important. We all agree we want consent. The question is, given that we don't have a specific consent for IP location, what can stand in for it?
Yes, and I thought we had consensus to get user media qualified in that area.
Well, I mean, the actual feedback from IETF95 was that some people did not agree with that, and they thought that, you know, we should not be making a normative statement here about that get user media must be the way that, you know, this is handled, but rather say that, you know, we would need some form of consent, and then give get user media as one, you know, non-normative example.
Sure, as I said, I think sufficient was the text I'm interested in. But okay, I guess, okay. Oh, well, we can waste another 2 hours on this, I don't think.
Alyssa Cooper. Not relitigating the actual recommendation. I'm just thinking about when this goes through IHG evaluation and what's going to happen. And I think the way that the text is phrased about get user media consent might benefit from a small adjustment, that instead of being in, this is not ridiculous, instead of being in the passive voice, explain it as like, this is how the user agent might justify such a choice, because it's sort of subtly making an argument for why that's a good choice, the way that I read this. Which is kind of weird, because the actual recommendation is, we're not going to tell you how to do this, but then it says, here's a way that it could be done, and here's why that way is good. Whereas there's going to be a bunch of debate about whether that way is good or not, and that's why it's not actually being normatively recommended. And so it would be better to sort of project onto the browser and say, this is why one might justify it, or this is how one might justify it, and not this is how we are justifying it.
Do you think you could write some text that would perhaps, perform that rewording? I'm missing a little bit of that nuance.
Yes.
Jonathan, to a slightly different point. First of all, can we have the slide back? The answer is we need Ted for that. But so I think you say gathering should only be done once you have consent. I would argue that the actual important thing is that the results of gathering should only be presented through the API. If you, as a browser think, okay, there's very high probability there will be consent, I'm going to start pinging this turn server so that once the user clicks on consent, it's ready. I don't think there would be a problem with that. Because the turn server is one of the things you do without consent. So it's actually the other interfaces, I think. But if people want to disagree with me, that sounds like a good idea.
So Martin Thompson, I think DKG is going to address that point. I was getting up to offer some suggestions from my long and hard experience with dealing with permissions and consent and things like that, and the W3C side of things. There's been a lot of discussions there. It's quite clear that different browsers have different attitudes towards the way that they ask for consent and the way that they consider signals from the user in particular ways. And this text, I think, with the friendly amendments that Alyssa was talking about, goes some way to addressing that, the first sentence. The rest of it, particularly that second sentence, are problematic. But the key here is that I think we must have a must on that first sentence, and that this is about the browser making a decision about whether that consent exists. Now, to Jonathan's point, you need consent before you start releasing those IP addresses into the wild. And sending messages to turn servers is doing that, since the turn server came from the application in the first place.
There's multiple parties that you may not want to leak your IP address information to. One of them is the potential communicant that you're talking to, and the other one is the turn server, right? You have a list of local IP addresses that you shouldn't just randomly publish to arbitrary websites that ask for them. So please, please do not release this information without user consent. So yeah. Sorry, this is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore from the ACLU.
This is Ted Hurdy from the floor, which I guess means I currently work for the floor. I'll do my best by you, floor. I wanted to go back to the problem that we may run into if we're not dealing with a browser. If somebody's using WebRTC from a mobile app, for example, my concern is that we don't want either the app or the downloaded JavaScript application in a browser to ever be taken as the simple act of downloading it is consent for sharing this, right?
Well, no.
And I can. Okay.
I think that, you know,
Ecker, come up if you think. No. Come on.
As it's sort of mentioned in the first sentence there, the key piece here, which is kind of implied by the surrounding text and isn't really present here on the slide, is that the drive-by enumeration is very specific to the web case. And that's actually, you know, drive-by has no consent. If you just go to a web page, you shouldn't have all your addresses enumerated. But if you actually go and install an app, that's something where the app, you know, you consented to installing the app, and that's a little bit of a different case.
So if somebody sends me an invite to play poker with them on PokerStars, our app example from long ago, does it automatically send my thing before I accept, or do I need to accept the invite as a form of user consent?
Well, that's getting to one of our other requirements, which is that if you are invited to join a call, you should only use relayed addresses that don't give up any location information until you actually accept.
Okay, and so if you use that as the parallel, I'm perfectly happy, because I agree with you that in that case, the relay address is probably not sensitive in the same way. But the fact that somebody tries to get me to join a particular app community or call in the PokerStars sense shouldn't send the data about where I am to that person.
Correct.
That's all I'm getting at. And if you want to make it under that requirement, I'm happy.
No, Ted, you're not going to want to sit down because I have no idea what you're talking about. like, I don't understand what rule you think you're applying to applications. To downloadable applications.
Okay, so somebody has a downloadable application that engages in a casual game. That casual game has identities associated with it. Let's say my ex-wife is one of the people who plays this game, and we used to play all the time together. I get an invite from my ex-wife to play this casual game. I don't want to send my IP address to my ex-wife until I have said, yes, I accept, we will play this casual game together. I'm willing to send the relay address, but my actual current IP, no. That tells my ex-wife whether I'm home or at the office or other things.
That's simply out of scope for this working group.
I don't understand how it's out of scope for this working group.
I'm saying, I'm talking a thing that was downloaded onto your computer, not a browser.
I'm saying if downloaded onto my phone, not, I'm thinking of the mobile app case, and I'm thinking in particular of casual games where you have peer-to-peer interactions that might use WebRTC.
Those are not WebRTC endpoints in the scope of the kind of stuff, the kind of thing we're talking about here. They're not JSON endpoints. They're not programmable in the same way. They're simply out of scope.
There are other people online. Let's take that.
Yeah, I waived the Peter Thatcher. I was just going to ask about Martin's comment that the must be a must. If it is a must, then this phrase is basically saying that you must not gather all possible candidates, but that could be achieved just by not gathering one candidate, right? So it's not a very strong must.
Yeah, okay, so to Peter's comment, then fix the sentence. We have some rules along the lines of the which categories of candidates fall into which class of things. Actually state in this sentence which ones are safe to gather in the absence of consent of any form. Write that down, and then we move on. I got up to point out something that I needed to say in the earlier statement was one of the concerns that comes with this choice of design, this choice of, well, we're not actually going to tell you what conditions consent come with, is that you don't have any determinism in your API. Just making that very clear that people writing applications to the APIs will now have less certainty about what it is that they can expect from an implementation that provides this API with respect to what IP addresses they're going to get under certain conditions. So if we explicitly said get user media is sufficient and you release all the IP addresses on get user media, then you would know that you call get user media, get consent for that, and then you would have all the IP addresses. What we're saying here is the browser decides what signals are necessary, and that may be signals of all sorts. It may be that the user has to move their mouse in counterclockwise 3 times to get permission to use these IP addresses, right? So I'll point this weakness out, and then I'll also point out that there is consensus in the W3C, at least to the extent that I can determine. I don't believe there's any chairs involved in this process over there, that this is okay for all forms of permission on the browsers. So just letting that information percolate. Oh, so non-determinism in terms of what it means to get a permission is entirely acceptable for all forms of permission. So non-determinism is embraced wholeheartedly, yes, especially for permissions is my point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, non-determinism is actually really good for solving hard political problems in the standards process, basically.
Well, yeah, so I was going to ask you, how is that different from the camera? I mean, okay, I just wanted to make sure. So you're just stating a fact about all of the permissions that are associated here, not just this one.
There's something qualitatively different here. So there is something different in this case. We have what I would call established social norms around the requirements to give consent for a camera. That has been well established. We have plenty of examples in the sort of implementations that are out there, and that is basically established expectations. That's less the case here.
This is TKG. So prompted by the rules lawyering, I think that about whether this is a strong must or not if we turn it into a must. It's also not a strong must because of some form of user consent. This is similar to sort of what Martin was saying, but maybe worse. If a user consents to, say, allow pop-up windows from this website, Is that some form of user consent? Do we have to worry about some implementer thinking that because pop-up windows are allowed, we can also do IP address enumeration?
I apologize to Paul. Paul needs to speak. So someone press the button.
Working on getting the.
Oh, it's what?
My picture showed up. Have I got the mic?
We got Paul.
Yes.
So I do have the mic.
We can hear you, Paul. We can hear you.
So I'm missing something here. Is the way I read this, I don't see any way this works if you got a session that only has data channels.
Then you don't get host candidates. Unless there's some other fraud that says, please give me host candidates.
Well, that seems like a bad.
That's the intended behavior.
That seems like a bad deal.
Well, I will say to you what I said to the people trying to push in the other direction, that we already agreed on this.
I mean, I know of some applications in production that do this. They
Right.
only use data channels, and they could very well. I mean, they can end up being co-located between the two ends, and therefore really want to get local candidates.
Right, and so the browser will need to give you a pop-up that says, would you like to give us host candidates?
Well, I know right now they don't, because they don't have any need for media.
Right now we don't do, right. So right now the browser behavior is to give out host candidates if you don't, at the moment, right? So the point is we're talking about removing that behavior and replacing it with one where we only give a host candidates if either you had a camera microphone or there was some pop-up, some yet unspecified incomprehensible pop-up which you've asked you to consent to.
Well, I mean, you could invent some other kind of consent that can be used instead of using media in the case when there aren't any media. That would probably work. But it would be pretty annoying for this application, I must say. But okay, but
yes,
I mean,
as I will say to you,
forcing requesting media when you don't, the user to give permission for media when there is the user interface has no use for media is going to be even more confusing for the user.
Yes, I agree with that. So I really don't want to be in Chicago debating this yet again. Exactly. I guess this seems to be a not particularly great outcome to a problem we don't have a particularly good solution for, and I feel like everybody's arguing about the exact justificatory text because they're unhappy with the actual outcome, and this is a way of expressing unhappiness, even though we have no better actual solution. So, does somebody have an actual set of rules that we wish to impose in the browser that are different than the rules we're currently proposing to impose in the browser, and that they think anybody a greater number of people will be happy about than the ones that we currently have, or will be happier about than this? Because if not, then I would actually suggest that we shorten the text and basically stop everything after the phrase everything after get user media consent, and then at least we'll have less text to argue about and with exactly the same rules.
So my understanding is that we're going to get a PR from Alyssa. If you'd like to provide a competing PR, you're welcome to do so. Or if the two of you would like to collaborate on the PR, I'm of course happy about that as well. But ultimately, we're going to have the text and agree on the specific text, because it's pretty clear that when we try and discuss it from first principles, we stay unhappy.
Dan Burnett, I agree. I was actually going to reiterate what Alyssa said, which is that basically all we can really do here is state that we require user consent. We can maybe give different conditions under which we want different levels of user consent, but for the most part, we cannot say how that user consent is to be obtained. I've always given the example that someone could actually download a different browser where the consent is given in the downloading and installation of that browser. And that's been true for the camera and microphone access specifically, right? All this time. If you're blind and you expect to use your browser to do only audio interaction, you may actually install a custom browser that always has your microphone live, okay? And that's always been acceptable. I think the same thing is true here. The fact that we don't like it, as Ecker says, is unfortunate, but we can't go beyond the requirement of getting user consent without saying how that needs to occur.
Wendy Seltzer, and just acknowledging Martin's comment on non-determinism. Yes, it's non-deterministic because users have different preferences, and for some users, this data will be, the IP data will be sensitive enough that they want to gate it on a different set of considerations, and whether that means that they're using extensions that give them greater control or choosing different browsers that give them greater control, they will have a different experience, and their experience of RTC may be worse, but their experience of privacy will better match their preference.
Yeah, just specifically on that topic, I know the Brave browser has an anti-fingerprinting mode, and when in that mode, there's even with consent, no local addresses are exposed. And so like there already is some non-determinism, depending on what browser you're running on, for how this actual gathering process will complete. I don't think that's really an issue.
So we are now at the end of today's session. Are the folks from the Copeland draft available at this moment to leap up quickly, and we'll try and do a couple of seconds on it? Go ahead. It'll take me a minute. Just start talking. I'll get the slide
Okay,
behind you in a second.
This draft is about requirements related to the authentication step of WebRTC, especially when there are IDPs involved in the setup of the communication. So the authors of the draft have done some use cases. Of course, the main input of these use cases for solving it is a WebRTC architecture security draft, which has sections about IDPs. But not only, also there are multi-parties. The possibility to set up a call between different domains. And for instance, an example of use case in slide number 3 is an enterprise use case where the caller party would like to hide her identity when she is performing multiple calls toward different B parties.
So I'm sorry, I can't see the slide numbers from here. Can you tell me whether I'm on the right slide? Okay.
So typically what they are afraid of, these are some kind of, I would say, user concerns requirements. They are afraid that their email identifier leaks within the identity assertion when the identity assertion is done. Another type of concern they have is that the B party, which is called, may want not to be called again by the A party, so that they would like some kind of, again, privacy regarding their identifiers as a called party. Regarding the requirements, I think also, basically to sum up, they want to be able to configure the privacy on a per call basis and also on a per IDP basis. So this is the example for the call center. I think the next example in the slide 4 is on the same, about the same vein. So basically, this is a summary of this slide.
Did it not change?
It's not.
One more?
So it's finished, basically. So they think that their requirements are important regarding the point of view of the user, And the question is it interesting to work on this in the IETF?
How many people in the room have read the draft? Ooh, that's not a good sign. Okay, the chairs would like to ask you to take a look at the draft, and we'll take to the list whether or not we need to bring this either as a separate draft or to fold it into any revision of the security drafts.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for such a short amount of time. As you can tell, things tend to run. Okay, that's it for today. We'll see you guys on Friday. I don't know if there's a repo. It's not one of my repos. Sorry.
Yeah.